Alright. Hello again, adventurers, and welcome to another exciting in-depth review. Today, we are going to be reviewing the brand new RPG released by Darrington Press, surprisingly enough, called Candela Obscura. Now, if you enjoy this content, please remember to like the video, subscribe to the channel, hit the bell icon to turn notifications on. All those things are super important. So, let's talk about this. Now, when I do an in-depth review, I do exactly that. It is very in-depth. I talk about the things that I like. I talk about the things I don't like. I talk about the things I think they did well. I talk about the things that I think they need to do better. And I go chapter by chapter, sometimes page by page. It takes a while. But most people don't want to sit through like an hour and a half or 2 hour long video just to figure out, do I want to buy this thing? So I always start these off with a should you buy this? And I separate potential buyers into 3 different groups. The first group is the group that I call players. These are people that are primarily, not exclusively, but primarily going to be sitting at a table and playing a single player character. The second group is a group that I call GMs. GMs are people that are primarily, not exclusively, but primarily going to be sitting in the GM or the storyteller or whatever they call it in that particular RPG. They're going to be the person basically running the game. They're in charge of playing all the NPCs and normally are in charge of writing most of the story and things like that. When we talk about Candela Obscura, you'll find out why I said the word normally. But they have very different needs than the players. And then the third group that I separate things into is called, I call them lore hounds. Lore hounds are basically people that may never sit at a table, but they really like the lore behind the product itself. They like reading about the world and everything. So, should you buy this? Well, let's find out. And I need a drink. The first group. Should players buy this book? So, whenever I do an in-depth review for a brand new RPG system, I always have to come with the caveat for both players and GMs that the should you buy this section is going to have the caveat of, well, if you want to play this system, you gotta buy the book. And so I do try, as part of this recommendation, I do try and flavor it with the idea of, okay, let's say you're not sold on the system yet. What can you kind of expect as a player to see if just this is a system you would want to play? And so for Candela Obscura, it's a really unique system. And I don't mean in the idea that the mechanics themselves are groundbreaking or anything like that. They're unique enough that I can confidently say that rolling dice in Candela Obscura is going to be different than most other games, but not different enough that it feels completely bizarre. And there's enough stuff in there that if you've played a lot of RPGs like I have, you're going to go, oh, well, that's definitely from this, and oh, that's kind of like this. So, while yes, it is unique, it's not ground-breaking, but that's not the part of the game that I think is really going to make this a different experience for players. I have been DMing and GMing for close to a decade now, and in that decade, I have literally thousands of hours of GM experience. And one of the first things I did when I first got into this is I designed my own parody campaign. I create my own character options. I publish them sometimes. I've even gone as far as to kind of format systems and stuff to do things that they weren't designed to do. That's kind of how I got involved with Zelda Universes. They wanted a Zelda RPG, and originally they wanted me to kind of translate D&D 5th edition into Zelda, and we decided to go with a completely different system called Open Legend. And then when our second campaign came around, instead of continuing in Open Legend, we switched over to the Cypher system, and I changed that to make it work for that. So I'm very used to being in the GM seat, and one of the most, I guess, intimidating aspects of being a GM, it's one of the reasons why it's hard to get people to GM and why there's always a GM shortage in almost every single game, is it's intimidating to think that you have to create your own world, or even if you're running something pre-written, you have to know this entire world. And that's not how Candela Obscura works. Candela Obscura puts, and they say this multiple times in the book, and it's, I've seen other books kind of hint at this, but this, for me personally, this is the first time I've read an RPG book where it outright states it is not the GM's job to create the world. It is everybody's job. And it's not the GM's job to write the story for the adventure. It is everybody's job, and everybody will help out. And because of that, playing Candela Obscura is going to feel differently than playing just about any other RPG that you've ever played, because they intend for the players to be making decisions that actually write the story. And I've done this in my D&D campaigns. I've done it in my Open Legend campaign. I do it in my Cypher System campaign. And every single time I have done this, especially with seasoned players that have played with GMs that are not me, or have a history in the... Anytime I go to them and go, well, what do you want this to be? What, in your mind, how does this work? And they'll go, I don't know. How's it supposed to work? We're going to do that right now. We're just going to, because I haven't written this part, we're just going to decide right now how this works. I don't have rules for this. And I could make them up on the spot if you want, but I think it'd be cooler. What do you want to do? And we'll just create it right here. You wanted to find a city. Okay. What kind of city did you want to find? And it always makes players really hesitant because it feels like you're breaking the rules. No. The only thing I have control over is my little character. And that's all I'm not allowed to touch anything else. That's all the GM stuff. And that's not how Candela Obscura works. And unfortunately, I think that is both a huge thing in Candela Obscura's favor and something that hinders it a little bit, because just reading through the book, it intimidated me a little bit. The idea of being a player and having a little bit more responsibility for the whole on your shoulders. That being said, the system itself, I like the system. There's some kind of issues that I have with some of the mechanics. Not so much that the mechanics themselves have anything wrong with them, but it's the way that they're using the mechanics to explain and connect to real world ideas that I have a history with dealing with, that I will go into in more detail when I get to the in-depth part of this review. But overall, as a player, there's a lot of freedom to your character, despite the fact that your actual options that you have are relatively limited. There's effectively, I have to look this up before I say the wrong thing. There are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. There are 5 different roles. And unlike, like a character class and subclass kind of system, I don't really see the role as a class per se. The role is more of a focus of a pair of classes in this particular instance. And I definitely can see, if this does well, them expanding and adding more classes to this, which they call specialties. But the roles are basically kind of a focus. What's your kind of main thing that you want your character to do? I would kind of compare it to the roles in 4th edition, where you had defender, leader, striker, and controller. where strikers all had kind of a similar purpose, but they were very, very different classes. And I kind of see the same thing here. And then each role has a pair of classes that are very different. Like for the role face, face is exactly what you would think it is. It is the character. They're very upfront. They tend to influence and manipulate people depending on which one you have. The two face specialties are journalist and magician. And I gotta tell you guys, I'm a little bit in love with the magician. The artwork for it is wonderful. He has a cape. I love it. And a top hat. And it's so cool. But yeah, when you choose a specialty, each specialty has their own character sheet. Very similar to something like the Powered by the Apocalypse system, where instead of choosing a class, you basically choose a character sheet. They call them books in that. It's very similar here. And part of that feels a little bit like it's going to be very limiting, but everything in this is designed to be generic enough that you can kind of mold it to however you want to play your character. And when you're playing the characters, you are very much telling a story that every so often has game mechanics that show up, as opposed to something like D&D where you have a bunch of game mechanics that help you tell a story. This is you tell a story, and every so often we're going to throw some game mechanics in there to make it a little bit more interesting, which is not a bad thing, but it is very, very different. And then for players specifically, this is going to feel very, very different. Not different in a bad way, but it is going to be very different. So as far as would I recommend this for players, again, if you want to play Candela Obscura, you've got to get the book. We're not going to talk about this. For people that have played RPGs before, this is a strong recommendation for me. The book itself is $40. If you buy it through the Critical Role store, you get the PDF for free. And to my knowledge, the PDF is only available, according to the Derek Dupress site. Right now, the PDF is only available if you buy the physical copy through the store. They eventually plan on selling the PDF on its own. Right now, you can only get it from there. However, they have partnered with, I can't remember what the website's called now. Nexus, is that what it's called? Demiplane, there we go. They've partnered with Demiplane. And Demiplane is an online thing. It's kind of like D&D Beyond, but it's not associated with D&D. And it has a bunch of different different games that they cover. Right now, they have things like the Marvel Multiverse RPG, Vampire the Masquerade, Hunter the Reckoning, those stuff. They have both Pathfinder and they're getting Starfinder 2nd edition, and they also just added 5th edition tools. But it's basically it's basically a D&D Beyond without being exclusive to D&D. And Darrington Press has partnered with them to where you can actually get effectively the digital version of Candela Obscura directly through them. And I believe the digital version of it is only $20. So that being said, if you've played other RPGs before, this is a strong recommendation for players because it's going to teach you to play your characters very differently. And I don't see a downside to that. It highly encourages... They use this phrase that I can't remember exactly what it is. I think it's fiction over mechanics or something like that. It's a really good phrase that they say over and over and over here, and I cannot remember what it is, but everything is about the story first, mechanics second, which is how I run most of my games. I'm always focused on the story, but a lot of RPG systems, you have to understand the mechanics and get them to work for your story. This is the exact opposite way. Tell your story and find a way to put the mechanics in. And the way that they pitch everything in the book makes it very easy to do that, but it's very, very different. And this is where the but comes in. If you have never played an RPG before, I have a bit of a hard time recommending Candela Obscura to you, simply because the fact that there is so much less structure in it, because again, they want you to be able to tell interesting stories and they don't want the mechanics getting away. But the lack of the intentional lack. This is not like, ooh, they forgot to put the port in. No, this is they have intentionally removed a lot of the hard and fast rules and structure in it, to make it easier to just tell really interesting stories using this system. And because of that lack of structure, this would not be the first RPG I would recommend for a brand new player, because they will get overwhelmed with the amount of choice. The idea of choice paralysis. There's quite a few other RPGs that I don't generally recommend to brand new players. Any of the D&D systems before 4th edition. 4th edition was flirting with the line of a little too crazy for a new player. And then 3rd edition, 2nd edition, 1st edition, they are remarkably complex. Things like Pathfinder's another one that I don't recommend for new players. GURPS, I don't recommend for new players because they're massively complicated. And if you don't have a kind of foundation of, okay, this is just how RPGs work, and having that kind of base understanding and then piling on the rules to that is significantly easier. I love to start players off with something like a Lasers and Feelings, where you learn the very basics of how an RPG works, and despite the fact that it's really, really rules light, it's not really designed to be complex or anything like that. So yeah, so for anyone that's played an RPG before, this is definitely get this book. If you are brand new to RPGs, you've never played an RPG before in your life, maybe start with something else and then get this book. I still recommend it as a book that I think most RPG players should eventually to try. Because again, it's a very different book, and it forces you to take more ownership over the story of your character. And I like that. But I just see this as being a little bit overwhelming for a brand new player. And again, when you think about the people that made this, the actual authors, who are they? Lead game designers are Spencer Starkey and Rowan Hall. And if I mispronounce those, I sincerely apologize. And I did a little bit of looking up just through like the Candela Obscura website, or the Darrington Press website, and that they have a decent history in the RPG space already. And to be blunt, game designers are going to be more knowledgeable than your average player, even your average GM, because they have to understand the kind of mechanics behind the mechanics in order to create new stuff. So it's, to me, this feels like an RPG written for RPG players, not an RPG written for everybody in the world. Which again isn't a bad thing, but I want to kind of flavor my recommendation of players. Yeah, I think the $40 is great. Again, I got it through the Critical Role store, so I could get the PDF and make this review as quick as possible. And shipping is my nightmare. The shipping for mine added another like $11 onto it. So once tax and everything was factored into it, this went from a $40 book to like a $55 book. And at that point, again, it's a really interesting book. $55 for me personally starts pushing it a little bit to the point of where I'm not 100% certain, because it's only about a 200-page book. It's not a really, really content-rich RPG. And the actual mechanics of the game take up less than half of that. A lot of the book is lore and just talking about the setting and everything like that. So $55 is a little much, but if you can find on Amazon or something where you can get free shipping, or again, again for the physical book, I don't physically have it yet, but I will eventually get it. And from everything I've seen, it looks gorgeous. However, since you can't get the PDF right now, $20 for the demi-plane version of it is a steal. $20 for a brand new game, TTRPG is a really great deal. It really is. It's hard to not recommend it at $20. And I like demi-plane. I've got because I backed Avatar, The Last Airbenders RPG. I got codes so that all the books that I physically own, I also have on Nexus. I like Nexus. It's a really solid platform. So it's not even like, oh man, I wish it was on something. No, Nexus is really solid. Or Demiplane, sorry. They call it the Nexus. So it's like the Candela Obscura Nexus or the Avatar Nexus for each one of the places. But it's a really, really solid website. I haven't bought the digital version of it yet just because I already spent $55 on this. I can't afford another $20 just to own another copy of the same book. Disability rocks. But yeah, anyway, so recommendation for players. Physical, yes, but maybe find somewhere with free shipping. And then digital, hell yes. Moving on. The next group. Should GMs buy this book? So, same kind of caveat that that I put on the players. As a GM, I mentioned before, they say multiple times in this book, it is not the GM's sole responsibility to create the world or to tell the story while you're doing it. The players should have as much influence, or maybe not as much, but they should have a massive amount of influence. And since there's a lot more of them than there are of you, you would think that makes GMing this game significantly easier than other ones. And this would be just an easy recommendation for GMs. And it's not. And the reason why is, again, that fiction over mechanics thing that they say in here, and I wish I could remember the damn phrase that they use. It might be fiction over mechanics. I can't remember, but it's really good. How did that happen? Sorry, something happened and now I'm zoomed in for some odd reason for something I don't want. Alright, I'll have to deal with this later. Every so often, my book just does weird things. That's fun. So, anyway, now it's working fine. Alright, so, and I guess the best example of this I can give you is the idea of the monster manual. If I was doing this as like a discovering new dragons kind of thing, one of the sections I talk about is monsters and how do monsters fit into this. So they do have kind of example monsters is in here. There's not a ton. And the reason why is there are no monster stat blocks. They say specifically in here, there's no hit points or anything like that. Everything is almost exclusively narratively focused. There are mechanical things called marks and scars that basically kind of track how hurt the players are. There really isn't an equivalent version of that for monsters. Monsters are defeated when the story makes the most sense for them to be defeated. The abilities that the monsters have are based on what the story should allow them to have. And the mark and scar system is specifically designed to facilitate this style of gameplay, where a body mark might be a scar, might be a bruise, might be like some form of like partial paralysis or something like that. Like, I mean, that starts moving a little bit more, but like a temporary partial paralysis, I guess, would be more of a mark. But there's nothing really hard and fast about how this works. Like, if we look at D&D 5th edition, the stun condition makes you incapacitated, which means that you can't take any actions. Like, it's very clearly defined, and it's just not in here. And again, it's not that they forgot to do it or something. This is intentional. And it's one of the things that makes the game so unique. But it also means that the GM really does need to understand how storytelling works, which is extremely useful in any tabletop RPG, but it's not required in any of them but this one. You can have no understanding of how story works and run a D&D campaign perfectly fine. It won't be amazing. You really do need to understand story to make a good D&D campaign. But you can run the system without any story whatsoever. In fact, early D&D didn't use story or anything like that. It was dungeon delves into the things like that. And the story just kind of evolved naturally from what happened. They even have multiple sections where they explain the process of how the story needs to be told and the different aspects of the story and what needs to happen in each part. I mean, they stop short of talking about like the multi-act system or anything like that. And if anyone doesn't understand that, it's a stage and film writing thing, or I guess it's just a writing thing, because you can have acts in books and things like that. So yeah, it's story structure and how it's created and things like that. And if you ever get like a degree in writing of any, you will learn very in-depth rules about how story structure works and all that stuff. They don't go that far, but they do lay out, this is the hook, this is the investigation, this is the escalation, this is the second escalation, and it's all very story focused, which again, not a bad thing. And I think this would be a benefit to any GM to learn how to do this, because all of this is really, really useful skills that any GM should have eventually. They're very, very useful, can be used in any single RPG. But again, that does mean you do not have the mechanics to lean back on and support you when you're in the middle of a session and the players decide to do something weird. You just have to go, okay, well, where do I think the story is going? How does the world work in my head? And because of that, again, this is another one where my recommendation is going to be, if you've ever played an RPG before, or if you've ever GM'd an RPG before, again, I think this is a fantastic book for you to go get. If you are a brand new player, or you've never GM'd before, if you've played lots of RPGs but you've never sat in the GM seat, I have a hard time recommending this, because this, again, feels like a really great way to burn someone out instantly if they're not ready, because there's just so much here, and there's so little for you to kind of cling on to. Again, intentionally, that's not a bad thing. This is the entire purpose of this, is to be a very rules light, very narrative focused story. And they've gone further than I think any other RPG I personally have ever played. I guess the closest I could say, the Powered by the Apocalypse system is very narrative focused. And I've run Avatar Legends, and so in that, the GM is empowered to really just basically kind of follow the story, and the players do have a lot of input, but there's still a lot more structure in Powered by the Apocalypse than there is here. Like, again, I have never seen an RPG that doesn't have monster stat blocks. Ever. There's no NPC stat blocks. There's nothing. The only ones that have a traditional kind of stat block are the characters. And so for me, again, that's overwhelming for a brand new GM. For again, if you've played anything else, I think this could be a wonderful experience for you. But this is not a game I think I would ever recommend to a new player. It's just this feels like a game written for gamers. Which again, not a bad thing, but I have to put that in. So recommendation for GMs: physical book for $40. Again, I think it's a great system, and I think every GM should try running this game at least once, because you will learn things. 100% you will learn things, and I think it'll make you a better GM. And if you get the digital $20 version, it's a steal. Again, I have issues with shipping. I cannot understand how shipping is so expensive, except for the fact that shipping is expensive. And I've just gotten used to, I have Amazon Prime, I get free shipping. Yeah. Taking this from a $40 book to an almost $60 book, that's a little bit rough. But even then, I think for GMs, I think GMs can actually get a little bit more out of this than players can. And I think players can get a lot out of it. So, yeah. Moving on. The next group. Should lore hounds get this book? For lore hounds, this is one of the weirdest recommendations I'm ever going to give, because this is not like an old school World of Darkness book where it's a novel that they accidentally put some game mechanics in. But this is definitely not your average RPG book with lore sprinkled into it. Again, the narrative is the most important thing in this. So there is lore throughout this entire book. But I think one of the more interesting things about this, one of the chapters is basically after the how to play chapter, which ends on page like 64. From page 65 all the way to about 158 is nothing but explaining the world, the kind of default setting for this, which is really cool. However, because of how the first part of the book, where it's explaining the mechanics and everything, goes, I skipped most of the lore. I mean, I scanned through it, but it takes a long time to get through an entire book to be able to do a review on it, and I haven't had it for that long. I did not go into the nitty-gritty of every single section and read every single thing. There's a lot of lore here. But this book is written in such a way that it would be extremely easy to set this in your own world with very little difficulty. And again, that is a strength for it. But that means for lore hounds, there's a lot here. And part of me, like, because it pitches itself by, because the Fairlands and the kind of default setting for Candela Obscura is basically kind of an alternate Earth that's set right around the Industrial Revolution. So early 1900s up to like maybe, 1920s, that kind of time. Because it's set in a world that's so closely related to the real world, and the entire kind of point of everything that you do is you guys belong to effectively a secret society called Candela Obscura, that deals with stuff that the regular population doesn't realize exists. It is so easy to just kind of insert this into any kind of modern setting without too much difficulty. Again, for Lorehounds, I think it almost feels like there's two different versions of the book, because the first book is just kind of explaining kind of the generic terms and how it kind of relates to the real world. And then the second half is explaining this Fairlands, which is in a completely unique setting that looks like Industrial Revolution era parts of Europe and the U.S., but is completely different with their own countries and things like that. And so it makes for a very, very interesting read, if nothing else. And again, it might be that I might be getting this feeling simply because I wasn't able to read absolutely everything. But for me personally, the actual default setting of the Fairlands didn't feel quite as fleshed out as I would have liked. Probably one of my biggest issues is there is a map in here of the Fairlands, but it's remarkably small and only shows a single city. And the way it's oriented in the book is it's a landscape map that has been twisted to fit in portrait because that's just how the book is set. And so reading it specifically as a digital document would have required me to actually reorient the PDF to be able to see it. And I'm not a huge fan of that. They do have one other map in here that is just of the kind of main city that this is set in. But the description that they give here is there's an entire world, and the only physical representation you see of it is of this single city and the lands around it. You don't really see any of the other countries or anything like that. And so for me, it feels like for the default setting, you're missing something. And again, it's very possible it's just because I didn't read all of it that I missed the parts where they really flesh everything out and help you to understand the world. I'm a big fan, especially for a brand new setting. I'm a big fan of having a map because the map just helps you to kind of orient how everything relates to each other, and they just don't really do that in this. So as far as do I recommend this for lore hounds, again, I think there's enough here for lore hounds to get a fair amount of fun out of this. Again, going officially through the Critical Role store, once you add in taxes and shipping, it goes from a $40 book to, like I said, I think mine was like 53 or 54 bucks and change. So at that point, I would have a bit of a hard time recommending it for just lore hounds, because again, it's a little over 200 pages, and a lot of it is really great artwork and like notes and things like that are written in universe. And some of it you can't even read because it's just strange symbols and stuff like that. So for that, I have a bit of a hard time recommending the physical book with shipping for lore hounds, because I just don't think there's quite enough to justify that much money. The digital, hell yes, go ahead and get it, $20. And if they ever, or when they start selling the PDF on its own, definitely, depending on what they price it as, if I had to take a guess, I would assume it's probably going to be somewhere around the $20 to $30 price point, since they already have a $20 version of it on Demiplane. So at that point, I'd say 100% get the PDF. Or again, if you really like things, or if you can find it on Amazon or anywhere that you don't have to, pay over 25% of the cost of the book in shipping, then yeah, definitely go for it. I just want to mention the whole thing with me harping about shipping. I do not blame Derek Team Press or Critical Role for the shipping. Shipping is not a nice thing right now. All across the country, it is remarkably expensive. So I do not believe that this is their fault in any way, shape, or form. I think $40 is a great price for the book. I can't justify the shipping. It's just so expensive. So anyway, so yeah, that's my recommendation for lore hounds. If you can get it without paying for the shipping, get the physical. Otherwise, either wait for the PDF or get the Demiplane version of it for $20 and read it through to the Demiplane, because there's a lot of really good stuff in here. Not quite enough for me to recommend it at almost a full-priced RPG book, but definitely I think lore hounds will like it. So yeah, moving on. So my quick wrap up of recommendations for players. The caveat I always have is if you've never played an RPG before, don't start with this one. But if you've played any RPGs before, yes, I recommend doing this because it's going to be a very different RPG experience. Either the physical or the digital, I think both are a great deal for players. For GM, same caveat. If you've never GM'd before, don't start with Candela Obscura. There's just too much unknown in it. However, if you have GM before, especially if you're a seasoned GM like me, pick it up either physical or digital. I think it'll be a great investment, not only for running the game itself, but for future games that you run in any system. And then for lore hounds, like I said, probably stick with the digital version for right now. There's just not quite enough lore in here. There's tons of lore, don't get me wrong, and it's very interesting, but there's just not quite enough that I can justify spending almost $60 on a book. So there it is. For those of you that have just come here to get a recommendation on whether you want to buy this, thank you so much for checking this out. Please remember to like, subscribe, hit the bell icon, turn notifications on. All those things are really, really good. In the comments down below, just tell me what is your favorite kind of mystery or horror kind of franchise, because this is a mystery horror style game. And if you have any experience playing horror style tabletop RPGs, let me know in the comments down below. Otherwise, again, it is time for us to get into the in-depth review. As a reminder, when I say in-depth review, I mean in-depth. I'm going to go chapter by chapter, sometimes page by page. I'm going to talk about the things that I like, the things that I don't like, the things I think they did well, and the things I think they need to do better. Now, because these go on for a while, I do put timestamps in the description, and they should actually show up because of how YouTube works now. They should actually show up on the video, so you can go to whichever section you find the most interesting. You can watch it in pieces and things like that. Makes it significantly easier for people to digest this. That being said, let us start. Chapter 1. The Introduction. And I'm going to just put a caveat on this. There are no chapter numbers in this book. So when I say chapter 1, it just means it's the first chapter. And they don't really kind of separate things into chapters. Like if I say weird numbers in here, it's because they didn't give me chapters. They just have page numbers. So don't hold that against me. So that being said, chapter 1, the introduction. The first half of the first page of the introduction is a great hook for, do I want to play this game? It kind of explains the theme of it. There's great full-page artwork on the other side of the two-page view. On the left side, you have this great full-page artwork. The right side, you have introduction. And then it does what every single other book that has ever existed in the tabletop RPG space does. What is a role-playing game? It's exactly what you would expect. I do like the fact that they do mention, like here, I'll read the first few sentences. If you've never played a TTRPG before, don't worry. We'll teach you everything you need to know. You're in for a series of sessions, each running anywhere between 2 to 5 hours, where you'll be embodying a person in this strange and dangerous world. You'll make choices about how this character acts, what they say, how they feel, all while interacting with your fellow players to help them tell their own stories. And it goes on from there. This is, it's a good description of what a role-playing game is. I really don't have a whole lot to say about any of these sections in any of the books that I review because they're all basically the same. I think this one does a little bit better because they specifically talk about you're in for a series of sessions, each running anywhere between 2 to 5 hours. I don't think I've ever seen another RPG that specifically says, by the way, the average session length is somewhere between 2 to 5 hours. By the way, that is industry standard. The 4-hour session is effectively the industry standard, and over the past, I want to say 5 or 6 years, the 2-hour session has started becoming a little bit more common, where there will be, like most one-shots are written for a 4-hour session. And now people are starting to write 2-hour long one-shots, but that 2 and 4 hours is just you are expected to understand that that's how long a session is supposed to run. So I do like the fact that they mention in here, okay, this is because nobody ever says that in any other book. You just eventually learn that, oh yeah, 4 hours is what I'm looking for. And you have to basically kind of learn it on your own. So I like the fact that they actually put it in here. And then as soon as we're done with what's a role-playing game, they have this overview of gameplay, which is really nice. One of the things I've criticized a lot of books, and I think D&D is the worst offender of this, is the idea that they write their books backwards. What I mean by that is they generally will put character options near the front of the book, and then the actual meat of the rules will come after the character options. If you've never played an RPG before, that becomes extremely confusing because they will give you all these character options and you don't know what any of them mean because you don't know how the game works. The reason D&D gets away with it is because everybody in the tabletop RPG world knows what D&D is, and even if you've never played a tabletop RPG, the rules of D&D have infected everything. Video games, anything with a leveling system built into it, even some businesses that use kind of gamification as part of their business, it's a thing, trust me. All that is based on D&D. So a lot of the aspects of D&D already exist in the kind of zeitgeist of society around the world. It's just something that's been assimilated. If you are not using those things, you really need to explain how the game works before you start talking about, okay, let's build you a character. Because if you don't understand what's important in the game, you cannot make good decisions for how you're going to build your character. And so the very next page after what is an RPG is overview of gameplay. And they actually give you a picture of part of a character sheet so that you can kind of follow along and understand what all of this stuff means. And it is not incredibly detailed here, but it does give you a very basic idea of, okay, you're rolling d6s. You need a grand total of 9d6. 3 of those 9d6s need to be a different color because those are going to be your gilded dice, which we'll talk about later. You have 3 different drives, nerve, cunning, and intuition. Underneath those drives, you have particular skills. I think that's what they're called. Something like that. So, yeah, they give you a very basic overview. This is how the game works. And if you are someone that's trying to convince someone to play Candela Obscura, it's on page 2. Go to page 2 and show them this. It's about 3/4 of the page is this overview of gameplay, and then at the very bottom you have the rules, and then the next page, page 3, is they have 3 different sets of rules. You have rules for the world, rules of magic, and then rules of Candela Obscura, which is 3. The world is just, this is how the world works. Magic, this is how specifically the magic system works. And again, all of this is narrative. There's no like, okay, you make this particular check to cast magic spells, you have this many magic points. It's all about lore-wise how these things exist in the world. And the same is true with Candela Obscura, is the kind of umbrella organization that you belong to. You're an agent of Candela Obscura. So I like that. I think that's a fantastic thing. And then, again, they keep going through more things. They have setting overview and roles and specialties where they kind of talk about, well, this is how the characters kind of work. Not giving you mechanics of what the characters are. They just go, okay, well, this is kind of their goals and their drives for how to do this. They talk about safety tools a little bit. They have this section called touchstones, which is basically, if you want to kind of get in the mood for Candela Obscura, these are books, comics, films, and video games that have a similar feel and vibe to Candela Obscura. More likely than not, these are also things that all inspired the various aspects of Candela Obscura. You see this is becoming significantly more popular in indie books in general. is they will list their various inspirations for it in case. And this actually has a really good benefit for players and GMs is if, because this is basically, touchstones is basically, this is their intention. This is what they wanted to recreate. So if you ever get to a point where the rules don't really explain in detail, okay, what's supposed to happen here, you can look at the touchstones and go, okay, well, we're trying to mimic this. So what ruling would make it feel the most like these inspirations? So it's actually a very valuable tool to know what it was that these people were inspired by and were trying to give a similar feeling to. And then they talk about a few other RPGs that help inspire it as well. Things like Apocalypse World, Kids on Bikes, Blades in the Dark, and I think it's pronounced Vaesen. All of these things they took inspiration from and things like that. And by took inspiration, I mean literally they were inspired by them, not they stole mechanics and used them for their system. It's not like that at all. Yeah, that's chapter 1. Moving on. Chapter 2. The core system. So again, this is something that I really, really like that they do, is before you're given character options, before you're told how you build your character, they explain how the game works. And that is really, really essential. I cannot tell you how many times I've read a book and the first thing I say is, oh, character creation's first. Damn it. Now I have to jump ahead in the book to figure out what any of this stuff means. And I don't like that. It becomes very confusing. And it also, as a player, and as a GM, as someone trying to learn the game, it flavors your opinion of the game because you see the cool stuff that you can do, but you don't understand why it's cool, how it's cool, or even how it works. And then when you do get to the rules, you kind of skip through things because you need to figure out what it was that you just read before you forget all of it. And so you kind of skip and move through stuff to kind of understand what it was that you just read, and it hurts your ability to learn the system because now you already have stuff as like, well, this word came up a lot, so I better look for that particular word. This word came up a lot in character creation, so I better look that up and make sure that I focus on that. Or, this thing sounded really cool, so I better look for the part of the rules that explain how this works. And it doesn't allow you to actually learn the rules as much as it forces you to basically translate what it is that you just read into something that makes sense. So I really, really love the fact that it starts off with explaining it, and the first subheading is called A Conversation at the Table. And that's what it is. They just call it a fiction-first tabletop RPG. That's the phrase that they use. Again, I've played a lot of RPGs where narrative trumps story. Like, that's a really, really common thing to say, especially in indie RPGs. If you do something like, again, things like lasers and feelings, there are so few mechanics that narrative has to trump mechanics. It's just, that's how it works. Because there's just not a lot of mechanics to deal with. But this one, again, is probably one of the first RPGs that I've played where they really mean fiction first. The narrative is the ultimate goal. And because of that, they describe playing the game as a conversation because it is. For people that are either not very well versed in what actual communication is, which is most of the US, and from what I've seen of other countries, a remarkably large part of the world as a whole does not understand how communication works and what an actual conversation is. A lot of people assume a conversation involves somebody talking to someone else. And that's not what a conversation is. A conversation is multiple people contributing ideas to a shared topic of understanding. Like, that is what a conversation is. A lot of people think of conversation as a very one-sided thing. I say something, then you say something, then I say something. As much as that seems like there's two sides, there isn't, because only one side is ever doing anything at any given time. But an actual really healthy conversation is two people both contributing ideas to a group focus of the conversation. And that's literally how you play this game. But it's not two people, it's like 4 or 5 people that are all equally contributing to this group's storytelling. And it's really, really interesting. They use the phrase yes and in this constantly. Which just goes to show this was written by actors. But so this book is just filled with the idea of you need to tell an interesting story, and an interesting story is told by multiple people. And they will constantly talk about the conversation, because this isn't a game where the GM explains a situation and then the players react. This is a game where a bunch of people with different roles and different responsibilities tell a story together. And it's fascinating. The dice system is remarkably simplistic. You roll d6s. A 1 to a 3 is a failure. A 4 or 5 is a mixed success. A 6 is a full success. And you will roll multiple d6s depending on your attributes and the things like that. Like, that's the basics of it. There is also this gilded dice system where you're different colored dice. There's a bunch of different ways that you can actually use a gilded die, but if you use a gilded die, you roll a gilded die as part of your roll, and you decide to use the gilded die's result. It doesn't have to be the highest. You just decide that you want to use it. You get some of your resources back, which turns rolling the dice into much more of I succeed or I fail. The gilded dice system allows you to do something that I used to do in Open Legend, because it's part of their core philosophy, which is every roll matters. When somebody fails a roll, it just doesn't mean, oh, it didn't work. Failing a roll can mean a couple different things. You fail, but it moves the story forward somehow, or you succeed, but with a twist. That's how Open Legend deals with it, and that's effectively what they do here. Is the idea that failure doesn't mean, oh, I guess I need to try that again. Failure means, okay, that route is closed off and the story's going to continue going. Mixed success is exactly that. You're going to get what you want, but you're going to get something a little extra that you probably don't want. And then they also have different stakes for things that the GM is supposed to inform their players of before they roll. By the way, this is going to be a low stakes thing, so understand if you fail it, even if you fail, massive bad things are not going to happen. Or this is a really high stakes roll. Even if you succeed, there might be some stuff that goes on, and if you fail, you may be rolling a new character. Or it may be the end of this particular investigation. If you fail this, the investigation may just end, and you have to go back and lick your wounds. Things like that. And I really, really like that. And then again, they talk about the conversation and constantly just reaffirming this idea of this is not a, okay, roll me this. Did you succeed? Now the story moves on. There is constantly a conversation and a dialogue happening between the GM and the players. Even in the middle of a roll, you're having this dialogue. And then when you decide on the result, something that good GMs in general do is, instead of, you make an attack roll and you hit. Instead of just going, okay, you hit. How much damage you do? He takes 12 damage. That's a mediocre GM. What most good GMs will do is like, okay, what did you roll? All right, so you draw your scimitar out, and as you run towards the creature, the lizard man, he snarls. He brings up his spear, but you slide down and you slice his hamstring. Roll damage. 7. Oh, and as you slice through it, you hear the creature howl in pain. As you get back up and bring your scimitar around for another swing, you watch him slowly collapse as the blood leaks out of the artery that you nicked, and suddenly he is no longer moving. That's what I would consider a good GM, and most people would agree with me. You want to narrate the successes and failures. Well, in Candela Obscura, you really don't have a choice. Again, because there's not a lot of hard and fast rules, and it's a fiction-first thing, you need to narrate what's happening. And the narration is going to be more important than the mechanical benefits or detriments that happen. Like, again, the kind of hit point system is you have marks. When you take damage, you get a mark. It can be a body mark. It can be, what are they again? I think it's body, brain, and magic or something like that. It's in here. Marks and scars. So body, brain, and bleed. Bleed is basically what they talk about is when the kind of supernatural world interacts with the mundane world. These bleed effects happen. Effectively, it taints the world. And so if you get a bleed mark, that means something magical has happened to you. A brain mark is something mental. A body mark is something physical. And basically, if you get three marks of any one of those things, so 3 body marks or 3 brain marks or 3 bleed marks, and then get another mark for one of those, your 4th mark erases your marks and then adds a scar, which is basically a permanent debilitation for your character. And we'll talk about how they do this in just a second here, because that's something that I really need to talk about. But yeah, so because of that, just saying, hey, you get a body mark doesn't really mean anything. And because of how the scar system works, you actually need to understand what each one of these marks did. And there's nothing mechanical about the type of mark you get other than body marks are physical, brain marks are mental. You need to tell the players what the mark actually is. So if you're getting a physical mark, well, then this strange shadowy creature appears. Player goes, okay, I'm going to try to attack them. Okay, you go ahead and roll a strike roll, and as you go for it, you notice that your dagger passes completely through. But as soon as your flesh touches the kind of translucent form of the shadow creature, you instantly feel jarring pain. And you look, and you now have a red frostbite mark going down your arm, and so that's your body mark. And by kind of looking at the body marks that you take, you will eventually be able to decide what you think is the most appropriate scar to get from those marks. Again, all of this is fiction first. Fiction first. They say this over and over again. It's fiction first. Fiction first. It's a very narrative-based game. And again, it's one of the reasons why I don't recommend new GMs to start with this system, because you are going to feel overwhelmed. If you are not used to narrating things, and you are not used to thinking about more than just the effects of something, but the actual visual manifestations of what does it look like when this happened? What does it feel like when this happens? How does the environment itself react to this situation? Good GMs will just naturally learn how to do that. But for a brand new GM, that would feel very overwhelming to me. Yeah, they talk about that and everything and making an action roll. And there's this thing called the rule of 6. You can never roll more than 6 to the dice, which 6 dice where any one of them can be successful. I don't ever see a reason why you would need more than 6 dice. Like 6 dice is a really, really nice thing, and it sounds like you really need to work hard to get 6 dice on anything. So I'm totally fine with that. And then they have like helping and allying, group rolls, and all that stuff. All that stuff they have mechanics for, but again, it's relatively generic, and most of the mechanics relate to, okay, well, you get to add another die to your roll. but it doesn't really change mechanically how anything works other than here's another die. And then they talk about the successes and the resistance system, which is basically, I don't want to get too much into it because it starts getting a little bit more complicated than I want to. But basically, for each of the 3 drives, you have a number of, I think they call them drive points or anything. And drive basically is one of the ways you can add extra dice. You have a limited number of maximum drive for any one of the different approaches or drives or whatever they're called. And if you're rolling something, you're like, I don't have enough dice here, I think this is something I need to succeed on, you can burn drive to be able to do that. Well, resistance, if you have, for every 3 points of drive you have in any of these focuses or whatever they're called, you get a point of resistance. And resistance basically just lets you re-roll stuff. So, again, mechanically, not remarkably complex, not a new system or a new idea, the ability to re-roll or anything. Very, very useful. Unbelievably useful. The ability to be able to re-roll dice in a dice-based game is always going to be very useful. And then they talk about gear. Gear is another thing that they do really, really interesting in the idea that you don't like equip your character before you go out. You basically, on every character ship, they have a list of like gear, and you can have 3 pieces of gear with you, but there's like 5 or 6 listed on your character sheet. And so during the adventure, if you realize that you need something, you just go, oh, I have this thing, and then you mark that for that adventure. And throughout the adventure, you can not have more than 3 of those 5 or 6 items with you. But once the adventure is complete and you go back to your home base thing, then you erase that in the next adventure. You get to just pick and choose. So you never have to kind of predict what you think you're going to need. You just have access to everything, and then you just remember that was the thing that you brought this time, which I like. Again, being some people like the idea of like a wizard being able to prepare their spells at the beginning of the day. They have to kind of predict what they think they're going to use. That can be a lot of fun. It can also just be a pain in the ass. So I kind of like this. So, that being said, I want to talk about the scar system. Because effectively the way the scar system works is, again, you get these marks. Marks are effectively kind of like your hit points. And you have a grand total of 9 hit points. 3 body marks. You can get 3 body marks. You can get 3 brain marks. You can get 3 bleed marks. Once you lose those 3 things of any one of those things, so if you get 3 body marks and then something happens and gives you another body mark, you erase all your marks and you take a scar. And a scar is a permanent alteration to your character. And this is where things start getting a little bit dodgy for me personally. For those of you that may or may not know, I'm 100% permanently and totally disabled. Most of my disabilities are mental. I do have a few physical disabilities like the tremor, and I have a degenerative hip disorder. My father was not only a disability advocate, he was also 100% permanently and totally disabled due to service-related injuries. He was a veteran. And before he became disabled, he worked for the state of Arizona when the Americans with Disabilities Act came out in the 90s. And his job was to go to various businesses and tell them how to be in line with what the Americans with Disabilities Act required them to do moving forward. So I have a long history in my family of dealing with disabled rights, and anyone that has ever kind of looked at disabled rights throughout the years, disabled people have been discriminated against throughout all of history. They're discriminated against every single day in modern society. I have a brilliant friend. She's a doctoral candidate. She's working on her PhD. She submitted a paper talking about during the pandemic how it took somewhere, depending on who you were talking to, it only took between about 6 to 9 months. So 6 to 9 months to go from, if it saves just one life, to, well, the disabled make me feel uncomfortable, so they deserve to die. 6 months, folks, to go from, we're going to do whatever we can to protect you, to, well, you make me uncomfortable and I don't feel safe around you, so I think you should die. Obviously, it's significantly more complicated than that, and her paper is absolutely brilliant on it. But this is something that not a lot of people understand, and especially when we talk about mental illness. And they have an entire section called The Legacy of Harm in Horror. The disabled, especially in horror, have never been treated nicely. Disabled people are either perpetual victims or they are villains. Specifically, the people with mental disabilities are constantly depicted as evil and dangerous in horror. You know, the crazy murderer, or the guy that has a psychotic break and goes on murdering people. A lot of people think certain mental illnesses make you dangerous. There's absolutely no science to support that whatsoever. People with serious mental disabilities, things like schizophrenia, and the other kind of like schizotypal personality disorder and other things like that, that people think are extremely dangerous and that these people can hurt you. No, you are something like 10 times more likely to be a victim of violence than you are than the regular population if you have a serious mental disability. Disabled people are abused constantly. The reason I've heard a lot of people talking about we need to bring back like insane asylums. No, insane asylums were literally places where you locked up people for being crazy and then abused them to death. That's why they don't exist anymore. There wasn't a positive side to insane asylums. They were just places where you locked people you didn't like and abused them to death over and over and over again. So when I see something like this trying to tackle and basically gamify disabilities, especially mental illness, I am always very wary. My personal opinion, I think mental illness is something that, and disability in general, is something that I think tabletop games not only can be used to explore, but have a better chance at helping people than almost any other form of media. You know, make a movie about disability. That's one of the other things that is a trope in movies around the world, is disabled people are only allowed to exist in movies if you can pity them or if their disability makes them superhuman. Really great example is Rain Man. Rain Man, Dustin Hoffman plays an autistic character, but he is a savant. He has this incredible mind for numbers and things like that, and Tom Cruise's character, uses him to count cards and win like that. And he could do things like Tom Cruise would just drop a box of toothpicks on the ground, and Dustin Hoffman's character could tell you exactly how many fell. That's a savant. And there are studies that have shown that like autistic people with savant-like abilities do exist. They are the exception rather than the rule. And the autism spectrum is such a wide spectrum that people can exist on it in so many different places and leave perfectly functional, normal little lives, and they're not superhuman, and they're not completely incapable of, you know, living, or they don't deserve your pity or anything like that. But all we ever see in media in general is the extremes. Either they need to be pitied, or they need to be supermen, or they need to somehow overcome their disability, and that makes them worthy of being in the movie. tabletop games, they've done studies, they've shown that tabletop games, people that play tabletop RPGs score higher when they measure empathy, especially in younger people, children and teens. They score higher in empathy if they play tabletop RPGs. So I think tabletop RPGs are a great place to explore really difficult topics like disability, like racism, and various forms of bigotry and things like that. They're a very, very effective way to teach people things in a way that they can't learn it anywhere, if and only if it's done correctly. And especially in horror, mental illness has never been done correctly. I do not believe gamifying mental illness is okay. I do not believe adding mental illnesses to your character is a way to make a more interesting character. I personally, I have the whole list, if I can remember all of it, because medication destroyed my memory. If I remember correctly, I have major depressive disorder chronic, generalized anxiety disorder chronic, social anxiety disorder, panic disorder with agoraphobia, and post-traumatic stress disorder with dissociative tendencies, and conversion disorder. So I have a gamut of mental illnesses, and they make my life miserable on a regular basis. I go to therapy every single week, or by go to therapy, I mean I go to remote therapy because I can't leave my house. I understand what phobias are. Phobias are not a joke. Phobias are not something funny. Phobia doesn't mean that you're scared of something. A phobia is a life-altering condition that your fear of something is so intense that you will change the entirety of your life to avoid having to deal with it. That is what a phobia is. It is incredibly difficult to deal with, and it makes me change how I live my little life. It's not, I'm super scared. It is a life-altering disability. The same is true about PTSD. I don't get PTSD from, oh man, that one time that, I was in school and we had like 4 tests in the same week. Oh man, I just got PTSD from that. No, PTSD is an incredibly debilitating affliction where something so horrible happened to you that it has permanently changed your brain chemistry. And due to that, there are certain things called triggers that can cause you to re-experience the same emotions, sometimes to actually relive the entire event, depending on how your brain chemistry works. And there's a billion other things that can happen to it. It's incredibly debilitating. It changes your life. And it's not a cool character quirk. And it's also not something that's fun to mimic with game mechanics. If we want to talk about like a PTSD flashback, it's not, oh, I need to make a wisdom save or else I have a flashback. Nope. I've had flashbacks, many of them. I had one fairly recently, like a month or 2 ago. It took me a week to get over it. Took me out of everything. I had a seizure because of it. It was unbelievably horrible. It wasn't a single wisdom save, and then if I failed it, I had disadvantage on something. No, it took a week for me to deal with it because I had to relive the most horrible experience of my life that happened when I was so young that I didn't even understand what was going on. So getting back to Candela Obscura. Scars, again, are permanent changes to your character. And they have mechanical aspects to them, which normally is my line. If you are tying game mechanics to a disability, I'm going to tell you, hey, you're doing this wrong, and you are belittling people that deal with this. Because even something, and I don't want to, this is not simple in the idea that it doesn't affect their life or doesn't do anything, but something as simple to understand as missing a limb. Again, I'm not saying that missing a limb is somehow lesser a form of disability or anything like that, but it's something that a lot of people can understand without too much explanation, because it's a very simple to understand concept. You do not have one of your limbs. Again, very complicated thing to deal with. I'm not trying to belittle that in anything, but even something as simple as I'm missing a limb is so much more complicated. Oh, well, then you get, you make running checks with disadvantage. This is not how it works. First of all, like losing a leg doesn't actually have to prevent you from moving at all. There are people that have missing both of their legs that have run marathons, that have won the Special Olympics and are incredibly fast. So it is unbelievably complicated. The same is true about missing an arm or even just missing a pinky or a toe or something like that. They are life-changing experiences of varying degrees, but they are so much more complicated than let's give you advantage or disadvantage or let's change this one aspect. You really have to kind of learn to relive your little life, and you can live the exact life you want to, but it's going to have to be in a different way. So that being said, going into this, when you look at the examples that they give here, like I'm going to focus on the mental ones because those are the ones that hit the closest to home for me, and those are the ones that I have the most experience talking about. So example brain scars, they give 2. And this is where I think they explain it a little bit better later on, but this is where I think they really start doing this right. So the way that they talk about this is they talk about, okay, you need to understand where the marks came from that turned into this scar, because they should relate somehow to the scar. And so the way that they talk about the example brain scar, the first scar that they talk about is cannot sleep. I've dealt with insomnia. I struggle with insomnia constantly. And here's a fun fact. A lot of sleep aids mess with your serotonin levels because your serotonin levels in general affect so many other things. Because I am hypersusceptible to serotonin syndrome, I cannot take the vast majority of sleep aids because they will kill me. Fun fact, I also can't take most antiemetics, which are nausea meds. Things like Dramamine, I can't actually take because it affects your serotonin levels and it will kill me. So I'm very familiar with the idea of insomnia and being unable to sleep. So the way that they explain it, they have the scar, can't sleep. They have an event, and this is the event that caused the brain scar. So the event failed to save a friend from death. So now they're going into much more of, instead of just, oh, you have a mental illness and it does this, like you're scared of spiders, so anytime you see spiders, you're going to have to roll a die or else you run around like you're super scared. It's not how arachnophobia works in any way, shape, or form. Trust me on this one, folks. So it starts off with you failed to save a friend from death. And they talk about how different people deal with different things differently. Some person might have a friend die that they blame themselves for the death. And it manifests as a severe kind of guilt complex. Another person might have the exact same experience. They still blame themselves for the death. And it manifests as, we used to call it Lancelot syndrome. Basically where they have to go out and save everyone and anyone they can. There's so many different, the brain is such a complex thing. So you go, event, failed to save a friend from death. Scar, cannot sleep. Results, no longer sure they want to be in Candela Obscura, will flee dangerous situations. And then the mechanical benefit is you lose 1 point from your sense skill, but you gain 1 point in your move skill. When I was just reading this part, I became upset very quickly because I'm like, no, it's not okay. That's not what something like that does. It's not what it's like to experience it. I don't like this. And the second thing they had was fear of enclosed spaces, which again, I understand fears and things like that. I have a phobia. So here it is again. Trapped in a burning building is the event. Fear of enclosed spaces is the brain scar. And then the results, not as detail oriented. They look out for future danger. They lose a point from focus, but they gain a point in survey. And that's when I started thinking, wait a minute, that actually isn't 100% inaccurate. Something I found out recently, abuse victims, specifically apparently abuse victims of narcissists, people with things like narcissistic personality disorder, and other things like that. One of the things most of them develop is what's called, oh damn, I just forgot the word. Hypervigilance, that's what it's called. Because of my PTSD and the fact that I am an abuse survivor, I have effectively permanent hypervigilance. What hypervigilance is, for people that don't know, is when you go into fight or flight mode, the reason that you do that is you're in immediate danger, and so your body is reacting to give you the best chance of living. And one of the aspects of fight or flight mode is it will dial all your senses up to 11 to give you as much information as possible so that you have the best chance of surviving. And that is called hypervigilance. And it will save your life in a lot of situations. It's the reason, the reason you have a fight or flight response is because when it is triggered, when it's supposed to be triggered, it's to give you an extra boost of energy, to heighten your senses, and to increase your ability to use your muscles, to give you basically superhuman abilities because you need them at that point. You're about to die. What happens with victims of abuse, specifically from narcissists will manipulate you and will get mad at you for the tiniest slight, because they want you to constantly be off balance so that they are the one that's in control. And so what happens to victims of narcissistic abuse is they become hypervigilant because they have to look for everything that might possibly set off their abuser, because when their abuser is set off, they take it out on the victim. So I have, because of my PTSD and everything, I have permanent hypervigilance. I can't turn it off, and it's unbelievably exhausting. In the house that we used to live in, it was technically a 2-story house with a basement. I could hear what people were doing, and I lived, if it was basically a box. I lived in the upper floor over here. I could hear what people were doing on the main floor on the opposite side of the house. And the house we lived in was infested with just so many things. I knew exactly where all the mice were in the house. I had the hardest time sleeping because I would hear everything at night and during the day and whenever I could find a time to actually sleep. I knew everything that happened in that house. Not intentionally. The house that we live in now, which is very wonderful, I still know where the other people that live in the house, I generally know where they are, despite the fact that I live in the basement now, and it's actually a remarkably well-insulated basement. I still know where everything is. I also know what's happening outside half of the time. I'm constantly hyper-vigilant. I know everything is going on because I can't turn my stuff down. So the idea that you'd lose a little focus, because it does happen when you know everything is going on, focusing on very specific things becomes much more difficult. And survey is used to kind of look around. That kind of makes sense. So moving on, the next page is called The Legacy of Harm and Horror, and they do talk about specifically, we don't need to be using ableist stereotypes. This isn't a game or something like that, and the idea that we're going to gamify mental illness or things like that. These scars should be logical results of the damage that has happened to you. To give you an example, like they do give, it's one of the things the book does really, really well, is they're constantly giving examples in this book. It's an example of a brain scar. They actually give 2 examples. Cat failed to save a friend from magical harm. In their state of grief, they exhibit outbursts when they feel out of control. At the same time, they're incredibly empathetic, and after this experience, they're especially good at talking with witnesses. Because Cat is too distracted after their loss to behave subtly, they're going to move a point from hide to read, as they can now connect more deeply with others. When you read the description, it doesn't sound as much like they're gamifying mental illness as much as they are, this is what's happening to them, and because of what is happening, we're going to find a way to explain what has happened in the game mechanics. We're not making the mental illness part of a game. We are changing the mechanics to fit their reality. And that is the thing that swayed me away from the idea of just blasting this as ableist propaganda that I've seen over and over and over again. There's a madness system in Dungeons & Dragons that years ago I thought was really, really cool because I liked the idea of, your damage not being entirely physical. And now that I've actually experienced a lot of these things, I realize just how backwards and bad it was. The second example they give, Danny misused a magical artifact to devastating effect and is now overwhelmed by high-stakes decisions. Because of this experience, she is even more dedicated to becoming a master of arcane artifacts and spends all of her free time training with her Lightkeeper. Lightkeeper is basically your Zordon figure. If you're gonna, because I can make anything about Power Rangers. It's your boss and your mentor kind of thing. They're the ones that kind of run the circle and send you out on missions. So going back to it, and spends all of her free time training with her Lightkeeper. Danny is going to move a point from control to sense because now she's focusing her studies on the magical rather than the mundane. And once I read those, and I think those are essential to understand how all of these scars work, because they have physical and they also have the bleed scars, which is basically magical scars. They have those descriptions for each one of those. And you need to read them because this system in and of itself could extremely easily be used the exact same as the madness system in D&D 5th edition, and a bunch of other systems that already exist, that it's going to do is misrepresent what mental illnesses are and belittle anyone that actually struggles with them by turning their daily, sometimes hourly struggle into a game that is resolved by a single roll. This is significantly different. These are the choices that my character has specifically made because their outlook on life has changed because of what happened. And because of the choices that they made and the things that have happened to them, I'm going to modify my character sheet to reflect that. I think this is probably one of the best examples of how to bring aspects like that into a tabletop RPG that I've seen. Again, if you don't read The Legacy of Harm and Horror, you will get none of this. And the system turns into a very, very bad system. So this is required reading. It is page 16 and 17. You need to read the whole thing in this book. But as long as you do this, I think this is a very effective way to deal with a really, really difficult subject. And I've been talking about this for a very, very long time. That is the end of that section. So let's move on from this. Moving on! That was intense. All right, so the next section, chapter 3, making a character. Again, characters in this, if you've played a Powered by the Apocalypse game, you're probably going to feel a little bit familiar with how character creation works, because again, you are picking a character sheet that gives you only a couple choices. You really only get two big choices other than where you're going to put your attributes. So this is not an incredibly complex thing. And as your character kind of grows, most of the growth they get is not in getting new powers. It's just increasing your attributes. You can get new abilities, but more often than not, you're going to be just improving stuff so you can make more rolls and have more resources to spend. Yeah, again, I like how they set up the chapter. I think it's really good. The artwork is so good because each one of the specialties is effectively a tarot card. And they're beautifully illustrated and they look amazing. They're worn. Some of them have like one of the roles is called muscle. And then one of the specialties is a soldier. And the soldier card itself, the edges of one of the sides of the soldier card are burnt. And I think it's really cool. And like the magician has wrinkles and stuff, like the card has been folded. If anyone understands how card magic works, folding and manipulating the cards is an essential part of it. A lot of times when you make cards like disappear and reappear, it's because you folded them in such a way and you're holding your hand in such a way that people can't see that the card is still there. And because they know what a card looks like, you can fold it in such weird ways that it doesn't look like it's possible you could be holding the card. And that's how card magic works. And so the idea that the magician's card is wrinkled, I really, really like. I think that's really cool. So yeah, I think like the whole thing, and the magician's card is not the only one that's wrinkled. I immediately thought that was kind of interesting. Yeah, the artwork is really, really cool. And then walking you through the character creation process, again, it's really easy to understand. It is spaced and kind of written out in a way that I was able to understand character creation really, really quickly and understand how everything is supposed to work without too much difficulty. One problem I do have with the book, they do not have character sheets in the book at all. Which I'm not a fan of. I think every RPG should have an example character sheet in the book. You can download the character sheets for free. You have PDFs. But again, that means you have to go somewhere else to get your character sheets. You have no idea what they look like without getting something completely different from a completely different place. Like if you walk into your friendly local game store and pick up this book, you will have no access to character sheets, because the character sheets only exist digitally. They only exist as a PDF. So you can't just walk into a game store, pick up the book, and sit down and start playing with a bunch of people. You have to do extra work and print out character sheets and things like that. So not particularly fond of that, but the character creation process in and of itself is simple to understand. And gives enough choices that if you wanted to, you could have two of the same specialty in the same group. To me, that's what I'm going to look at when I'm looking at an RPG is there enough customization that you could have two people playing the same class and still feel special? And there's enough choices that you can make at level 1 that you could do that. I would probably recommend against it. Having two people of the same role, perfectly fine. Two people of the same specialty, you're going to feel a little bit redundant. It's not impossible. You can still feel very, very different, but I think it's going to be a lot better if everybody at least has a different specialty in your group. Not different role. Like, again, the roles themselves are fine, but I think there's only two real big choices. You can choose a role ability, and you choose one special ability, and you choose one role ability from 3 available, and you choose one special ability from 5 or 6 of available for each of the specialties. Yeah, so because there's only a choice of 1 of 3 and then 1 of 6, There's not a ton. And then as you level up, you can actually technically take more of the abilities that you didn't choose the last time. So the higher your level, if you're playing this same specialty as someone else, the more of a chance that you guys are going to feel like you're kind of the same character. But other than that, again, the abilities themselves are really interesting and fun and have a lot of variations. And then another thing that other RPGs will put this in as kind of like an optional rule is you have to form relationships with something. It's one of the things that I've actually seen as part of a session 0 is you sit everybody down and you go to each player and I go pick a character at the table and define a single relationship you have with them. And there are a lot of RPGs that they'll have that as kind of an optional rule to give the characters a reason to work together. And it's good sometimes. There's some situations where I like the idea of just 3 or 4 complete strangers coming together and their relationships form as they adventure together. Some people don't like having previous relationships to things. The relationships are an essential part of Candela Obscura. And the way that they work is you choose a relationship and then you choose a question related to that. For example, you can choose one of the relationships is enemy. And there are 6 different questions you have to answer. So if you sit down at the table and each player is going to choose one other person at the table and they're going to choose a relationship with them. So, and you don't have to choose the same relationship. Like this character could declare that one an enemy, and that same character could choose them, and they could choose confidant for their relationship for it, because unbalanced relationships are interesting and tell for interesting stories. They're not pleasant to exist in. They're remarkably unpleasant to exist in. But from a storytelling perspective, they tell interesting stories. So if you decide an enemy, you get to choose one of these 6 questions. I'm not going to read all of them, but to give you an example, like the 4th one, you were allies once, or you were once allies, what tore you apart? Or despite being enemies, you and this person share a secret. What is it, and how does it bring you together? This is such an interesting aspect, and with the idea that this game is built around storytelling, this creates really interesting stories, especially again when you do have those lopsided relationships where 2 players have decided that they're going to form a relationship. I have to remember, let's see, this stage the table should share the characters, now record the names, then choose one type of relationship and accompanying question in this section to assign to each. So you actually form a relationship with every single character, which is, again, very different from most of them. Normally it's like choose one and do that. This is, you have a relationship with every single character. And again, they have a total of 4, 8, 12, plus the 3, 15. They have a total of 15 different relationship types, like rival, muse, stranger, ward, soulmate. And then under each one of those, they have 6 questions. So even if you have 2 characters that decide that they want to have the same relationship prompt, they can choose 2 different questions and come up with something completely differently. And again, they give examples of how to do this, which is absolutely essential for a game that is this different. So one of the examples, Kaylee says to Kat, "You are my ward. I financially support you in secret because I was in the same circle as your mother, and I believe she died during an investigation due to my negligence. If you knew the truth behind her death, you might seek vengeance, so I purposefully keep you in the dark. I've come to love you very much and will risk my life to improve yours." That is an interesting story. And again, because this is all out in the open, it does force the players to immediately learn how to deal with player knowledge versus character knowledge. They continue the example with Kat says to Kaylee, "You've become my muse." So for Kaylee to Kat, you're my ward. For Kat to Kaylee, you're my muse. You've become my muse. You inspired me to leave the religious cult known as Pyre, something we'll talk about later, where I felt like a tool of destruction. You've shown me a better way to live, and for that I am grateful. You lost your soulmate, and I have a small amount of real magical ability, so I'm dedicated to learning more about death during my work with Candela Obscura, because I hope that connecting you with the spirit of your lover will make you smile again. So as you can see, two characters, two completely different relationships, completely different motivations behind it, but they still interact, and neither one of them understands the entirety behind the relationship. And this is how real relationships work, folks. You very rarely understand exactly what your relationship is with other people unless you have incredible communication with them, which we've already discovered most of the world doesn't understand what communication is. So yeah, just really interesting and unique system. Yeah, that's the end of character creation. Moving on. It's going to be another long one, folks. Chapter 4. Creating your circle. So, the way that Candela Obscura works is Candela Obscura is this investigative agency. And it's big because they're dealing with basically a parallel dimension that every so often bleeds into the real world and causes issues. Now, Candela Obscura is the overall umbrella organization, but there's little teams inside of that work together to solve specific mysteries and things like that. They're called investigations, and those are called circles. So after you build your character, you also have to build your circle, because every circle has a light keeper, which they explain later in the book. Light keepers are basically former agents that developed 3 scars. Once you develop 3 scars, if you get a 4th scar, your character is dead. You can't handle more than 3 scars. So basically what happens to most light keepers is they are working, they develop 3 scars, and then instead of just quitting Candela Obscura, they become a light keeper and help lead their own circle. So your light keeper is your mentor. Effectively, the light keeper is the role that the GM takes at the beginning where they're giving out the quest. They're the person with a giant exclamation point above their head, to use some MMO terms. So when you create your circle, it needs to be more than just, hey, we just kind of came together, because this is a secret society that investigates the supernatural. You're not going to meet in a tavern. You have to have a reason to go together. So you start off with answering your circle questions. You choose one of the following questions. Things like the first one. You have all known one another for a long time, but your circle was recently formed. Why were you brought together, and how do you feel about it? So you want something that kind of defines where the circle came from. You need to give a name to your circle. The circle of quiet commons, the circle of vim and vigor, the circle of squares. Just something to kind of give you a unique identity that you can all kind of latch onto. And then you need to choose your chapter house location, which is basically that's where your secret place is. Again, tons of examples. The Circle of Skull and Sovereign maintains a small townhouse on the eaves. 3 out of the 4 members are highly educated and exceedingly wealthy. The townhouse is richly appointed, and they hire a live-in nurse to care for the frail lightkeeper who lives within. They never want for material resources, but must rely on their member born in South Soffit, another part of the city, for any reliable information about the more nefarious activities in New Fair. That's the name of the city. No one would believe it, but this circle loves to loosen their ties and host a night of drinking and cards. So you need to come up with a reason where your circle came from, name the circle, choose a place where your clubhouse is, and then you also have this thing called circle abilities. Circle abilities are just special abilities unique to your circle. So your circle is a character as well, and it has mechanical benefits. And then they also have resource points. in between adventures, you don't get to take a long rest and everything is okay. You actually have to spend resource points. There's three different things you can invest resource points in that you can eventually use. So Stitch, clear all marks for one PC. Refresh, recoup all used drives and resistances for one PC. Train, take a d6 they may be used on any roll in the next assignment. You have a limited number of resource points that the circle has to share. So after an adventure is complete, if you all decide to use Stitch to get rid of your marks, that's great. It means you don't get any of your drives, which is basically what you use to get more dice in that. Or if someone decides to train, maybe they didn't take as much damage, they decide to train. Another one might refresh because they were going through their drives like they were running out of business. And then another person is really, really damaged, so they use Stitch. But you can't do all of them. You have you start off with a number of resource points equal to your members plus one. So, and your circle doesn't get those back after every mission. This is not like, oh, now we get our downtime. No, you actually have to do certain things for all of those things to come back. So this is very much a resource management game. You're not going to be able to go into every single adventure being fresh like you can with Dungeons and Dragons or literally any other RPG. You're always starting off the day fresh. So yeah, all of that I find really, really fascinating. Moving on. All right. The next chapter, what are we on now? That was Chapter 5, How to Play. And this is something I find really interesting because, again, Chapter 2 was the core system, which basically told you how to play. But the how to play section is a little bit different. This is where they talk about, basically they give you kind of the structure of storytelling. So they start off with the play structure, the opening, the investigation, closing an assignment, between assignments. They kind of talk about how things go for these investigators. And then again, they talk about fiction first storytelling, make choices, leave opening. They have all these kind of tips on how to have the most fun and most interesting story. And then they start talking about the more specifics of things like drives and resistances. Like nerve is one of your drives. When you spend nerve on a roll, you're physically exerting yourself beyond your usual capacity. If you're rolling with move, you might push your body to its maximum speed during escape. It goes on. Cunning. When you spend cunning on a roll, you're paying particular attention to the way in which you are interacting with others. So they're really giving you the why behind the what in this section. They've already explained the what. That was the core rules section. This is how the game works. This is why the core rules is how the game works. The how to play section is the why the game works. And I love that about this. Then they give you some more kind of specific things like actions for move, run, dodge, navigate, or for focus, inspect, analyze, remember. Just kind of examples of how to use your different things, how to choose an action. Tons and tons of examples. For example, Kat is talking with a ghostly phenomenon that haunts a sepulchre within the necropolis of Old Fair. They want to ask, why do you continue to inhabit this land? The GM tells them to make a sense roll. So that's an example of making a sense roll. There's just tons and tons and tons of examples over and over and over again. We talk about gear and how that works, and why it works and everything like that. And then they talk about their character and circle advancement, and specifically this asset called illumination keys. Basically, you have this thing on your circle sheet that has a number of circles. And as you do certain things, you will get what are called illumination keys, which you use to fill those up. All of those resources in your circle that allow you to heal and things like that only come back once you have fully filled your illumination circle. And from what I can see here, I don't think it's possible to fill an illumination circle from a single adventure. Bare minimum, you're going to have to go on at least 2. And depending on what happens in the investigation, it might take you 3 or 4 to make a single illumination. So you technically only get the equivalent of a long rest maybe every 3 or 4 adventures. Not just 3 or 4 days, 3 or 4 gaming sessions effectively is going to have this. And that I find really, really fascinating. And when you fill that illumination, not only do you get all those resources back, but also it's effectively how you level up as well. So when you fill an illumination thingy, you get to choose a new circle ability, and then each player can choose 2 different options for their characters. And they give a bunch of different things that you can do. Immediately after that, from page 56 up to page 62, literally all it is a full example of play. And I'm not going to read the whole thing, but basically what they do, I'll read the beginning thing. The Circle of Salt and Cinders is investigating reports of exsanguinated corpses in Hollow Harbor per an assignment from their lightkeeper. Circle includes Leo the journalist, he, him, Wynn the occultist, they, them, Lydia the soldier, she, her, and Iris the doctor, she, her. When Iris and... Let's try this again. Wynn and Iris fought together as partisans in the war. Lydia is Leo's ward. Lydia was engaged to marry Iris's brother George before he died in the mysterious circumstances that led Lydia to Candela Obscura. So that's what it is. This is the... their assignment is they're these exsanguinated corpses, which I believe exsanguinated means they don't got no blood. So they might be dealing with a vampire or something. And then the entire rest of it is just a description of how everything works. Again, I'm not going to read the whole thing, but I am going to read the first paragraph. Elise, the GM, says, your investigation begins on the docks of Hollow Harbor in the early evening. Porters are finishing up loading and unloading ships as sailors and traders from across Hale wind down their day. The periphery has already set up a cordon at the site of the latest death. Two uniformed officers watch the street, and there are 2 more down the poorly lit alley working on something you cannot see. It literally just describes, not an entire session, but probably about like 20 minutes of a session. They write down everything, what all the players say, what the GM says. It is a and it also even gives you their roles. Like here, Elise says, sure, spend a point of intuition for the assist. And Danny, give me that survey. Danny says, I've got a 1 in survey plus 1 for Wynn's assistance. Danny says, I'll spend 1 from intuition as well for another die. That gives me 3 dice in my pool. Danny rolls a 4, a 6, and a 6. So double 6s mean it's a critical success. And it goes on from there. This, I've seen this, I think Avatar Legends did something similar to this, where they just basically wrote down an entire part of a session, and it is unbelievably useful. This is the one thing that if you are brand new to RPGs, this would be the one thing that would make this almost possible for someone that had never played an RPG before to understand how to play. And it's really good. It's phenomenal. And then at the end of it, they have questions to consider. What details should Elise have provided Lydia if she hadn't rolled a critical success investigating the corpse using her mirror? So not only does it give you a really good example, but it also gives you things about, well, what if this happened? How would that change? This is a beautiful teaching tool. Again, the trainer in my name has nothing to do with Pokemon. I was an actual professional trainer. That's what I did. It's what my passion is. I love teaching people new things. Something like this is a brilliant training tool because it gives them a real world example, And then after it's done, it talks about, okay, this was one way it could have happened, but these are other things that could have happened in there. Because just seeing how something happened once is not an effective training tool, because that is one of thousands of different permutations that situation could have handled. Any good trainer, after a situation is done, is going to go, okay, what did you guys notice? What did you say? Very good. What do you think did well? What do you think didn't work? Okay, what would have happened or what should have happened if this aspect changed? This is incredibly effective training material, and I've never seen something like this in an RPG. Again, Avatar Legends does do the thing where it kind of writes out part of a session, but it doesn't have that question to consider aspect. It's useful, but this just kind of seals in that aspect of, no, this is designed to teach people how to play, and it's an incredibly effective way to do that. Obviously, what's more effective is actually playing it, but unless they start embedding videos in physical books, you're not going to be able to see that. So, yeah, absolutely brilliant. Moving on. Chapter 6. The Supernatural World. This is where the lore starts. So starting chapter 6, which is on page 65. The full color art is on 64, which is still really gorgeous. This is where they start kind of building the default setting. And again, because of how they built this book, were I to run Candela Obscura, I would not use the default setting. Not because the default setting is not a good setting or anything like that. I think it's brilliant. I think it's really, really interesting. If not a little bit under-described because they want you to kind of make it your own. I would set this in a place that's significantly closer. Like, I would use a real-world setting and choose a city that I was relatively familiar with and go from there, because they give you so much information about how to create your own setting that then showing you the setting that they made for this is great. And I think a lot of people will probably use it because it's a really interesting setting. I would make my own setting. They give me so much information in here about how to do it that it would not be difficult in any way, shape, or form. That being said, it's really good stuff in here. It really, really is. Tons of artwork. They talk about creatures and monsters and different types of the things, and just everything about it. They go into a little bit of history. And I don't think I'm going to... So that chapter is relatively short. Again, it starts on page 64, which is full color art, and the last page is 71. So less than 10 pages, and it's just kind of establishing the rules of the world. This is how magic works. This is how bleed works. This is what the flare is. Stuff like that. And then it gives a few examples of different phenomena you might deal with. Creatures and monsters, environmental hazards, stuff like that. Moving on. Chapter 7. Candela Obscura and Beyond. So, this explains the actual organization of Candela Obscura. Again, a relatively short chapter. Starts on full color art on 72. The words start on 73. It's done by page like 81. But again, this is just telling you about how Candela Obscura works, and the kind of hierarchy and how everything works in there. Again, if you're using this pre-built setting, very, very useful. If you're making your own setting, this is probably the most important chapter, because the Candela Obscura is important to understand how it works if you're going to make your own kind of flavor of it. And then after that, they also talk about a bunch of different factions, like the Exoteric Order of New Sciences, or Pyre. That was mentioned in one of the characters' relationships. They talk about Pyre and the Sisters of Ash and other things. So these are other kind of organizations that you will probably deal with in here, and there's a remarkable number of them. And then interspersed in there, you have like newspaper clippings and handwritten notes and stuff that's just really, really cool. And that's that. Moving on. And the reason I'm going through these really, really fast is because they're just really short. Chapter 8. The Fairlands. Again, this is the actual world. Again, they do have a map that is... It is a landscape map that has been turned portrait, so I can't read it super well. But it's a relatively small map. Like, the center of the map is New Life, the city that everything is kind of set in. And that's it. They mention other countries and stuff like that, but it doesn't really show it here because it's such a small kind of cut of the world. Like, this is the map that they give that is effectively your world map is smaller than like Barovia. Like, this effectively would be probably like Castle Ravenloft and maybe the village of Barovia, which is not a massive amount of area. There's so much more of Barovia, the demi-plane where you have like the Amber Temple and all these other places in the mill and everything like that. And this is such a tiny part. And they do things like they go over the time period. They give a really cool timeline with a big old rip in it, which I find interesting. And they talk about the history of the Fairlands, which is very, very useful. Talk about the last Great War, and stuff like that. They talk about technology, economy, a few of the various organizations and stuff in there. And then like life in the Fairlands. This is how normal people live. You're not normal people, but this is what you would be, used to. And then they specifically talk about New Fair, which is the city, and they have a kind of zoomed in map on New Fair, and they show the various different districts and things like that, and give little descriptions of each one. But those are the only two maps in the entire thing. And again, they're very stylized, artistic maps. They're not something that you could ever use for like directions. Like the way that I would compare them, if you ever read the Chronicles of Narnia when you were a kid, or maybe as an adult, they're great books. In the beginning of most printings of them, they will have a map of the kind of known world. And so it'll show you like Narnia and Calormen below it, and they'll show you what Cair Paravel is and stuff like that. But it's not really something you could use to like plot movement or anything on, because it's a very artistic, stylized map, and that's kind of what they have here. You can't really see individual roads beyond like the things that separate the various districts. So while yes, it's a very, very nice, pretty map, it's still not quite enough. Like if I was to run this game, I probably would want more than just this little map for my players to use if they wanted to get, if we were adventuring in New Fair, I would want a more detailed map to run a city-based adventure. Like, you can look up maps of Baldur's Gate, and it shows individual streets and things like that. And Baldur's Gate is a massive city. It's one of the largest cities in the Forgotten Realms. Same is true of Waterdeep. You can see everything in there and can use it very easily. This you really just can't. So yeah, they go through all the different districts and stuff like that. And they have, again, really beautiful, almost impressionistic looking artwork. Like, it's all kind of fuzzy and very much kind of dark watercolor-esque, where the artwork seems to kind of like bleed into the page. It's beautifully done. Like, it's just really, really, really good. And some of it is kind of sketches and pencil work that feel like they were done in universe, which I really, really love. It just adds so much more flavor to everything. And And yeah, without going into specifics and everything, that's really all this entire thing is just talking about the world and kind of giving you a bunch of places that you can set adventures in. Which again, very, very useful. And then on page 150 and 151, there are 2 pages that are mostly gibberish. They just have random symbols written on them. With every so often, they will have hastily written cursive that I can't read because double vision is a curse. So that's interesting. Yeah, that's that. Moving on. Chapter 9. Running the game. Talked about this many, many times before. Most new RPG books have a running the game section. And it's kind of a toss-up which flavor of running the game section you will get. Some of them, like the Essence 20 books, the running the game section is really, this is how you run this example adventure. And that's really all it is. It's meant to prep you to run the example adventure. And the GM chapter is really meant for more kind of vague GM tips. The running the game section for this particular book is very much, this is how you GM in general. This is not, here, let us help prep you for the introductory adventure we've included in the book. By the way, we'll talk about that in a second because that's a whole different experience for this. But it does explain, this is how, like making moves, this is basically when the GM does stuff. It gives you a step-by-step list of, this is, making moves is basically when you ask for a roll for something. And so it gives you a step-by-step with not only explanations, but examples. So the steps that they list here indicate what's coming. Ask them to choose. Show them the danger. Limit the scope or effect. Introduce consequences. Give them what was promised. Think off screen. It is a really, really great step-by-step instruction of, this is how you make moves. This is how you ask for rolls. Again, compared to most other books, the DM's guide for D&D 5th edition has nothing on this book. This is really, really good stuff. And then they keep going. Things they talk about Session 0 and how to run that for this particular book. For this particular game, I've mentioned before, we have deified Session 0 and turned it and basically fetishized it to this amazing, wonderful thing that if you run a Session 0, nothing ever will go wrong. And if you don't run a Session 0, you're an evil, disgusting person and you're trying to abuse your players. Neither of those things are true. Session zeros are a very useful tool that in some instances are very helpful, and in other instances are a complete waste of time. A hammer can do a lot of things, but if you're trying to paint a picture, a hammer is not going to help you. The same thing is true about Session zeros. However, there's certain systems like Fabula Ultima or this one where Session 0 is really a kind of required part because you have to, you can't just have each player build their character and then bring them together. You have to build your circle together. So because of that, a Session 0 is a little bit more essential in this than some other games. And they talk about preparing for play. This is how you do your prep work and stuff like that. They talk about how to create a light keeper, and they give 5 different examples of light keepers. And this is where they mention that most light keepers, I'm quoting directly from it, most light keepers are Candela Obscura members who have taken 3 scars and would find themselves in mortal danger if they continued field work. Thus, they have chosen to remain in the organization to lead a circle of their own. So when you're building your light keeper, who's basically going to be the Zordon to your Power Rangers, you need to understand exactly, like they were a player character and now they can't do that because if they do it again, they'll die. And then you talk about combat marks, and this is where the thing gets most confusing because again, there aren't monster stat blocks. There isn't, you have to hit it this number of times and it dies. It is entirely narrative focused. And so, as a GM, you really have to understand how to tell an interesting story and how a conflict will resolve itself in an interesting way. One of the tips they give at the very beginning of this is think like a director. Frame scenes, describe shots, move the spotlight, and keep the story rolling. Set the pace and tone and judge based on the needs of the table. This is a lot more than just running a game. You are telling a story and you are kind of directing the story. Now, you can have the best director in the world. If they don't have actors that are equally doing their part to tell this story, then the movie's going to suck. Really, there is no movie without the actors. But also, there's no movie without the cameraman. And there's no movie without the lighting techs and the grips. And everything comes together. And that's kind of how Candela Obscura works. Everybody has to come together to tell this story. And you have certain people that have different focuses or foci. The director is going to be the one that's kind of viewing everything from an overhead view and kind of directing where things go. That's the GM's role. But the players are just as important. The players can go, hey, I don't like my mark over here. I think it'd make more sense. Or I feel my character is doing this. And they're talking with the other actors and going, hey, listen, for this particular scene, I really need this from you. Can you give me this? Or, hey, when you did this particular thing that gave me an idea, would you mind if I tried this? That is what, that was my favorite part of acting. And not every single movie, play, whatever works like that. There are some that are very, very much, these are the words that you say. You only say the words that are in the script, and you only move when the director tells you. And then there's other ones that are much more collaborative, and both of them can create extremely amazing, wonderful entertainment. But that collaborative acting, which again, this to me just screams that this was written by actors. Because so much of this I identify from being an actor, and good acting and good creative processes are just built in here. But again, running a fight is very, very interesting. And then they do other things like countdown dice, which is basically, if you've seen my Fabula Ultima thing, it's kind of the same aspect of a clock, except you use a die instead of a clock to do it. Yeah, and then they go to assignment structure. And this, again, it's not written in the exact words that you would see in a college level writing course, but this is 100% like this is writing 101. You start with your hook. Optional step, you have a call. And this is specifically stating that sometimes like these Candela Obscura agents don't live in the secret clubhouse. They have lives. And so they mentioned specifically, it can be actually really rewarding for the players to go, where are you when you get your call? What are you doing? So that they know they have a life outside of this. Then you have Arrival, Exploration Phase 1, Exploration 2, Escalation 1, Escalation 2, Climax, Epilogue, which most people call Epilogue, but I find it hilarious to call it Epilogue, because that's how it's spelled. But yeah, in the Epilogue. And then they give example assignments. Now this, when I first read this, I'm like, oh good, they have pre-written adventures that you can do. They're not. They're literally write-ups of adventures. You cannot run any of these. They're not designed to be run. They're designed to show you what a full adventure looks like. And that's, again, something that I've never seen before. Every single RPG, and it's generally what I say in these reviews is, if you're going to make an RPG, you need to have an example adventure in the book, because that last part of just having something that they can run that's pre-written is essential in learning the game, and they don't have it here. Each of these things, they'll go premise, what's actually going on here, details, threats, notable figures, and then they have hook, arrival, exploration, escalation, climax, and they move on to the next one. Premise, what's actually going on here, details, hook, arrival, exploration, exploration 2, escalation, climax. Now, theoretically, if you wanted to use these as kind of a map to run something, you definitely could. But these are so linear, and they tell specific steps that the investigators take, that you would have to kind of template them to use them. At least as far as I can tell. Again, I haven't read every single one of them things, but to give an example. For the example session, Still Life. For the arrival section, the circle finds the camera Oscar is using to take the photographs is resonating heavily with bleed. The camera in question is old and weathered, but its casing is gilded with an ornate filigree. So what they're describing here is these are the actions that the adventurers or the agents in this particular example took. They're not giving you options of you can ask them to do this. This is literally just telling exactly what they did. And they just never have the resolution here. So if you wanted to use these to run an adventure, you have to basically kind of cut out the parts where they're telling you what the players already did, because you have to let the players make their own choices. So I would not say that these are adventures that you're supposed to run. These are supposed to give you an idea of what it looks like when you run an adventure. They're expecting you to come up with everything on your own. Which again, another reason why I don't recommend this for brand spanking new GMs. They have a remarkable number of these examples, and then they have additional assignments where all they do is effectively give you a plot. Like, for example, champagne problems. Below an abandoned drugstore lies a speakeasy hosting the wildest party in town. After a body is found in front of the abandoned drugstore, unnaturally aged and crumbling to dust, Candela Obscura investigates. And then they find the New Year's party. So even then, they tell you everything that happens in it. It's just a real brief example as opposed to going into specific details. So yeah, it's just, I've never seen a book do that ever, where instead of giving you a pre-written adventure to run, they just tell you, hey, this is what an adventure looks like. Go make your own. So yeah, really interesting. And then they have a GM resources. This is a section where they talk about a bunch of chapter houses that already exist, a bunch of NPCs that you might use in your game, locations that you can use, some specialty gear and artifacts that you might be able to use. And then they go to effectively the bestiary section. They call it creatures. And again, all of these creatures are just a single paragraph explaining them. None of them have stat blocks or anything like that. Like, to give you an example, bookworm is one of the creatures. So bookworm, spelled Bookwyrm. So worm as in kind of dragon version of worm. So a small serpentine abomination that feasts on knowledge. They infest libraries or other places that house text, then devour the intent or meaning infused in the writing. While the books remain intact, the knowledge is gone forever, and anyone that attempts to read a consumed book will walk away confused. To defeat them, one must reclaim a piece of lost knowledge to weaponize it against them. It is a particular job of the conservator of the fourth Pharos to protect the library from these vermin. So that is the entirety of the description of a bookworm. And this is something that you can use in your own adventures, just like you'd be able to use a goblin or something from D&D, but there's no mechanics around it. They just kind of explain the story that you might tell with it, and it's up to the GM to kind of figure out how the players are going to deal with that. And they give you a way to defeat them. To defeat them, one must reclaim a piece of lost knowledge to weaponize against them. But that is so vague that it could mean anything, and it's going to be up to the GM to really define what that means. And again, they have basically 3 pages of this, 2.5-ish, of these different monsters that all they are is a single paragraph. Again, I've never seen this in an RPG ever. And it's fascinating. Yeah, and then other stuff like organizations that exist, additional inspiration, so themes, names, locations, stuff like that that you can just use if you're in a bind. And then the final part is a rules and roles reference. So basically, if you were to print off pages like 198 and 199, you could very easily turn that into 2 pages of a GM screen. Because it's just kind of shortcuts to stuff that's really useful. You'd also just print them off and hand them to the players so that they all have something that they as a rules reference, which is exactly what it is. And then yeah, they have a little bit of artwork and a couple more like notes and stuff in there than the index, and that's the whole book, folks. So yeah, moving on. 2 final thoughts. Again, this is such a unique RPG. It is very much designed for creatives. I keep saying like this is a book that's written by actors because so much of the stuff in here reminds me of. I did actually go to school for acting for 2 years, and not only did I go for school to school for acting for 2 years, but I also was top of my class. I was regularly the highest scoring or one of the highest scoring students in all of my acting courses. My other courses I did okay. I wasn't super great, but any acting course, we would critique each other's scenes and things like that, and I was always one of the people that they would call out and go, no, that was really, really good. So I was at one point a good actor. Not anymore. Meds will do that to you. But I recognize a lot of the meat of how you do this from some of the stuff I learned from my actual classes and some of the stuff that I just learned from being around other actors and other people that were really passionate about acting. Fun fact, I don't think any of the people that I went to college with are professional actors now. I don't think. I haven't kept in touch with all of them, but a few of them turned into teachers. One of them writes for a fashion magazine. And he's great. And I don't know what happened to a few of them, but none of them are showing up in Hollywood or anything like that. The only friend I have that actually went into professional acting after all this stuff, and most of them have degrees in theater because they didn't drop out and they actually got their degrees in it. The only friend I have that actually did it was a buddy of mine from middle school that actually is a working actor and I think he does a lot of summer stock. So anyway, so yeah, this whole book, the creative in me loves it because it's about collaborative storytelling in a way that, I mean, I've pitched D&D as its collaborative storytelling. It is to a point. But you can play D&D with people that can't tell a story. And there's enough rules and things that you can kind of rely on it to kind of get a story out of it. This really requires everyone buying into it. Not buying in as in buying the book, but kind of buying into the premise and being willing to work together to tell a story. And I've done that before on stage, and I've done it in a few different situations. It's a music thing too. I used to do jam sessions and stuff when I was in high school, where you would literally kind of write music live with another person. We even had a concert we did once where in the middle of the concert we were just doing it and we just started jamming with the audience and just kind of feeding off of what they were doing and feeding off of each other. It was, from a creative perspective, is one of the most fulfilling things you can do, is truly collaborate with people to create something unique. And that's what this feels like. This feels like an invitation to collaborate and tell stories in a way that I haven't seen before. However, because of that, that does mean that this is not a game for everyone. Most RPGs try to make something that is something that everybody will like. It's part of marketing, to be perfectly honest, is you want to have as large an audience as possible. And This, I don't think there's anyone that physically cannot play this. I don't think it's that kind of thing where this wasn't made for you so you can't do it. No, but it does require you to buy in to the the idea that yes, you are going to be expected to write some of the story, and you're going to be expected to interact with other people as they write part of the story, and this is a collaborative effort, and not everyone enjoys that. I know quite a few players that enjoy experiencing a story where they get to make choices, but they don't have to write it. All they have to do is make the choices for their characters. And that's a perfectly fine way to play. I'm not saying that's a bad thing, but a player like that might feel overwhelmed in a story in a game like this. And I think that's probably the most interesting aspect of this is it's not made for everyone, but I think everyone can play this if they're willing to try. Which sounds like a contradiction, but it's not. And yeah, it's things like Fabula Ultima got me excited to play. Things like Candela Obscura gets me excited to examine it. And I have not watched any because Critical Role has been I think they're on their second campaign, I guess, for Candela Obscura. That they've been broadcasting on their Twitch channel. It's on their YouTube channel. I have not watched a single episode. I'm not a huge fan of horror in general. Panic disorder will do that to you. Now that I've read it, I'm actually interested in watching it just to see if my predictions about this are accurate. Because again, when I was an actor, something like this was the goal of most of my friends that were getting into acting, was the idea of we want to get on stage and collaborate with other people and create interesting stories. Like that is what actors do, and that's what they want to do. And a lot of times you don't get that ability depending on which style of acting you're doing. Theater acting is very, very different than television acting, is very, very different than film acting. And depending on who you have, there are some directors that want to have a very strong hand, and they want to make sure that all the performances are the exact performances that they imagined in their head. And then there are other ones that are going to leave it to the actors, and they're basically going to watch the actors and kind of help just point them in a direction that makes the most sense. But it's the actors that are leading things. And then there are other times when the writers are the ones that are really kind of ensuring that everything goes, and they'll write very detailed notes, and they'll ensure, and they'll write stage direction and everything, and they'll ensure that the scene goes off exactly how they wrote it. And so it's remarkably rare to get into a situation where the actors actually get to work together and create something unique. And that's what it feels like this is. And that excites me. But I've done scenes with actors that don't want to create their own stuff. They've got a script, they've got a director to tell them what to do. They just want to act. They just want to, interpret the words that are on the page the way that they think they are, and then just go to it. They don't want to write a new story. They don't want to try new things like that. And if you put them in a situation where they're effectively forced to, it's a remarkably unpleasant experience. I don't know if I were to run a Candela Obscura game. Most of the time when I run a new RPG, I invite anyone and everyone to do it. If I was to run Candela Obscura, I would personally pick every one of the players. I would not allow effectively walk-ons. Because for the first experience for me in this as an RPG, I would need to ensure that everyone was going to pull their weight, because I don't know the system well enough to be able to make up for someone not pulling their weight. And I find that fascinating. I've never seen an RPG like this. And again, I've not seen every single RPG. It's very possible that there are other RPGs that are like this. Like I know, what's it called? I played it on tabletop. It's basically you basically recreate a Coen Brothers movie, and I can't remember what it's called. Anyway, I know there are other very narrative focused games where the rules themselves tend to take a back seat to just telling a story and might not be super combat focused like a lot of RPGs are. Fiasco, that's the name of the game. I've never played Fiasco. I don't own Fiasco. So yeah, this interests me. I will probably watch at least one episode, if my brain will let me. Probably watch at least one episode of Candela Obscura just to see how they do it. And yeah, I don't know if this is the kind of game that I would ever like play or stream without a lot of controls and without making sure that I had the exact group of people I wanted to play with. But it excites me, and I think it might be a lot of fun, especially if I could get a bunch of actors together to do this. I think this could be a lot of fun. So anyway, that is going to be all for me today. As always, remember to like the video, subscribe to the channel, hit the bell icon to turn notifications on. All those things are super, super important. In the comments down below, say something. I am so worn out from delving into this because it's so unique. Say something in the comments. It really it massively changes how many people see it. One of the other YouTuber people that I know that I've talked about has actually found a number, like each comment that was on a video would get them anywhere from like 17 to 30 additional views. And they're a bigger channel than I am. And that number probably changes now because they've gotten even bigger. But yeah, no, writing anything in the comment section will vastly change how many people see this. So please, please, please put things. If anyone from Directing Press or Critical Role is watching this, you need to make better life choices. There are much better things you can do with your time, but I sincerely appreciate it. I love the stuff that you guys did to do, and I have been a critter since the very first episode, which aired the day after my birthday. So yeah, I love everything you guys have done. You guys have made a hell of a game here, and I can't wait to see what you guys do next. And call me sometime. Like, I want to be your friends. Anyway, again, that is all for me today. I will see you guys in the next time. All right? Bye-bye.